Hi everyone! In today's video, we're going to be doing an adult size chunky knit blanket. This blanket measures 45 by 60 inches. It's super cozy and fits 1 or 2 people under it. Before we get started, I would love if you would like, comment, and subscribe on this video. It really supports my channel. Let's get into the tutorial. For this project, we're going to need 6 skeins of yarn. And you can see I'm using the Bernat Blanket Big in the color black. You're also going to want a measuring tape, a pair of scissors, and a lighter. To begin, we're going to make a slip knot. If you're unfamiliar with making a slip knot, I do have a video on how to make a slip knot for beginners. It goes nice and slow and reviews that information. So that video will be linked in the description below if you'd like to check it out. Once we have our slip knot, let's just make sure it's the correct size. I would like my loops in the first row of my blanket to be about 3 finger widths in size. So I've just made my loop a little bit bigger so that it measures approximately 3 fingers. Once I'm happy with the size of my slip knot, I'm going to keep making loops until I get to a total of 32 loops. So to do that, I'm going to reach inside my loop, grab my working yarn, and pull another loop through that's about the same size. I'm going to reach in with my fingers, grab my working yarn until it's the same size. So keep pulling loops through until you have a total of 32 loops. So I've just completed my 32 loops for my foundation chain, and I did a quick measure just to see where we're at. I'm measuring just about 39 inches, which is okay. I want my final blanket to measure 45 inches in width, but I find that it does stretch out after making the foundation chain. As you keep making more rows, the blanket actually stretches out a little bit, so it will be my ideal size once I make a couple more rows. To make our second row, what we're going to do is flip our chain onto its back, and we're going to work into these little bumps that you can see in the middle of the loops. For the first loop of my second chain, I'm going to be working into this bump right here. You can see I've got this end loop, and then this is the first bump. You can see this is the second bump. So I'm working into this bump right here, and what I'm going to do is pull a loop through this little bump. I'm putting my fingers underneath the bump and pulling yarn through. For this second row, we're actually making our loops a little bit smaller. You can see that they're about 2 fingers in size, whereas these loops in the first row were 3 fingers in size. The reason for that is that we are going to have a border to our blanket. So this first row is obviously part of the border, and then these little end rows are part of the border as well. So all of our border loops are going to be 3 fingers in size, but all of the body loops, or the loops in the middle of the blanket, are going to be about 2 fingers in size. Let's continue pulling loops through the little bumps, and we're making the loops about 2 fingers in size. So into the bump, and pulling the yarn through. I'm just about finished my second row. I have 2 bumps left. So this second to last one is going to be another 2-finger loop. And this last one is going to be part of our border up the side. So we're going to make this loop a 3-finger loop. You can see this bottom is our border, and then we're going to make a border up the side as well on both ends. So we'll be working on the border as we go. Before continuing, I recommend counting all of the loops of the second row that you just made to make sure that you have a total of 32 loops. Remember that your little border loop counts as 1, so let's just make sure. We have 32 loops, so let's continue on to our third row. We're going to skip this end loop here, part of our border, and we're going to work into this body loop here. So we're going to go into the loop with our fingers and pull yarn up to make another loop about the same size, 2 fingers. Now again, we're going to go into the loop next to it, put our fingers through, grab the working yarn, and make a second loop about 2 fingers in size. We're going to keep pulling loops up through our existing loops until we get to the end of our blanket. I'm now at the end of my blanket here, and I have this loop left at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is make a loop through that loop, make it 3 fingers in size, and then leave it off to the side. We're starting to make our border along the side of our blanket. Let's do one more row together. This will be our 4th row. So we're going to go into the existing loop, pull up a 2-finger loop, and go into the next loop and do the same thing. So keep pulling loops through the existing loops until you get to the end. Now at the end of my 4th row, I have 1 2-finger loop left, and then my border loop. So into the border loop, pull up a 3-finger loop and leave it off to the side. We're going to be continuing with this method of pulling loops up, going back and forth until we get to the end of our blanket. I will meet you partway through. When we run out of this skein of yarn, we'll have to connect another one, so I'll meet you at that point. I've completed about 8 or 9 rows, and I've just run out of my first skein of yarn, so I'm going to have to attach a new one. Before we do that, I just wanted to remeasure and show you guys that after several rows, you do end up at your desired length at 45 inches, which is perfect. So what I'm going to do as I keep going is measure every few rows and just make sure that I'm at 45 inches. And obviously keeping the same tension of your loops will help, but I do like to do that, just measure every few rows to make sure that I am still on the right track. Let's add our next skein of yarn. Just going to find the end. And there are a couple methods to attach your yarn. I know some people like to tie a knot. Some people like to actually sew them together using a needle and thread. The most secure way and the most seamless way that I've found to attach them is to burn them together. So I'm actually just trying to find the end. Inside, you've probably noticed inside these chunky jumbo yarns, there's like a plastic cord in the middle. So that's what we melt together. Those two plastic ends will melt together and become one. And I find that really, really secure when I'm attaching my yarns. So I've got the end here on this one, and then I'm going to find the end on this one that I finished. The end of this one is actually really fluffy and it has a little bit of a curl to it. So I'm going to just trim it so that I can really expose the end of the yarn that I'm trying to attach together. So I can see there now, there's the end of my yarn, there's the little plastic in the middle, and that's what I'm going to attach to my other end. To attach them together, I'm going to use my lighter and I'm going to light one end. It does not matter which end you light, just whichever end feels most comfortable for you. I usually like to light the one in my left hand and then grab the new yarn to attach with my right hand. So that's what I'm going to do. Attach the two ends together, just hold them for a second because it will be hot. And then once it has cooled down a little bit, you can start to kind of play with the two ends. And so I'm just kind of smushing them together to make sure that there's a really nice strong hold and that they're definitely attached. So you can see now that they're attached, it's totally seamless. You can't even tell where one started and the other one finished. And what I like to do is just do a little pull test to make sure that it is actually nice and secure. So I'm just going to finish making loops and I will meet you at the end of our blanket. Nearly finished. I've completed the body of my blanket and it's measuring almost 60 inches. So I know it's time now to do the last row. And I've done 66 rows, so my final row will be 67. Keep in mind though that everyone's knit size is different. Your loops will be slightly different than mine. So if you don't have the exact same number of rows as me, that's totally okay, just as long as you get to your correct measurement. That's what matters. For our final row, what we're going to do is first make sure that we have enough yarn. I'm going to take the remaining amount of yarn that I have and go back and forth 4 times just to make sure that I have enough to close off. I've found that if I have about 4 times the length of my blanket, then I have enough to close off. To close off our row, what we're going to do is take this loop that you would have just finished in your most recent row. If you're on the other side, it's still the same concept. So you're going to take this loop that you've just made and make sure it's about 3 finger widths in size. And then we're going to make a second loop beside it and make this one also 3 finger widths in size. So then we're going to take this bunny ear, the one on the right, and loop it over top of the one on the left. Because I'm moving from right to left, I'm going to be taking my right bunny ear and looping it over top of my left one. If you're going from left to right, you're going to take your left bunny ear and loop it over top of your right one. To continue on, we're going to make another bunny ear, another loop about 3 fingers in size, and then take this loop and bunny ear it over top. So the right one over the left one. We're just going to continue this until we get to the end. We're on our last 2 loops here, and it worked out perfectly because I have just enough yarn. So in this second to last loop, we're going to do the same thing, make a bunny ear, right goes over left, and then this side border one, same thing, we're going to make a loop, and then right goes over left. Then we're going to tie a knot in this top corner. As our last step, we're going to just weave in our ends. So all I do in that case is just find space to hide this yarn, just weaving it in and out of the blanket. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you love your new chunky knit blanket.